Dispatchers help callers on the worst days of their lives. For over 25 years, we've been there. A silent partner in millions of calls thanks to our redundant and diverse networks that ensure call delivery. Today, cities are bigger, traffic more congested, and the challenge is more complex. But you're never alone, because InDigital is quietly improving, implementing, and driving the next generation of 911, so you're supported in every situation. Make the switch at indigital.net.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services, and a big shout-out to subscribers as always, and for all of you who are watching, listening, supporting, sharing, all of it. Thank you so very much, because I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you, so I appreciate you. And it is December 16th, 2024. This episode won't come out for a few weeks. So when you see it, it'll already be past Christmas. So Merry Christmas to all of you. Last week was the final Dare to Be Great virtual event. It was amazing. We had December 9th through the 13th. Yes, it ended on Friday the 13th. So Merry Friday the 13th is what we were saying. And there were just a lot of powerful sessions, powerful stories, just everything that was going on the last day. On the 13th, there was 4 sessions, 90 minutes each, and they were panel discussions. Each one of them was amazing. The last one was called No Dispatcher Left Behind. And if you have not had a chance to check that out, make sure to do so. Simply go to crowdcast.io/C/DTBG6. And the registration is free. It is available for replay so that you can watch it on your time, on demand, whenever. They are all there, and you can see them as many times as you want. We had attendees, over 1,000 attendees from all over the world, and it was just a great way to go out with a bang for Dare to Be Great. So again, make sure to check all of those out, and I appreciate all of you for your support. So I am excited for my guest today. This is actually basically like a year in the making. We were talking about this about a year ago, and we didn't end up doing it. But here we are. We're about to do this, and I'm super excited for my guest today. My guests today are Kathy and Jason Lott, and they are with the Thin Gold Line Foundation. Hello.
Hello.
How are you all doing today? Is it cold over there? Is it snowing? Because you guys are in northern Michigan, right?
It is foggy and raining and not that cold.
Oh, well, then I guess that's better than what it was probably about a week or so ago. I thought there was like feet of snow all over the place.
We're in a bubble and we barely get it. But yeah, just to the west of us got a couple of feet.
Oh, well, that is pretty awesome, because I was in Southwest Michigan, actually about 20 minutes away from Lake Michigan, and we would get that lake effect snow all the time, like those super fat flakes. It was always good for making snowmen, but yeah, sometimes you just didn't want to be out on the road. So I'm glad to have the both of you on here so that we can finally do this episode. I was reading over the information again that you had sent me that far back, and there's a lot to unpack here. So again, happy to have you both here. So let's jump right in. Jason, How did you get involved in public safety to begin with?
So during high school, I wanted to be a police officer. So I tried to behave as much as I could, but being in high school, it wasn't always feasible to be a good person. But I tried to stay out of trouble, tried to stay out of jail. And when I graduated high school, I went to college and started a degree in criminal justice. So I could be a police officer, have a college degree. But at the same time, I got introduced to being a volunteer EMT. So I joined a volunteer fire department in my community, which was in Waldorf, Maryland at the time. And at that time, Waldorf was the busiest all-volunteer fire department in the United States. So we were very busy. And I loved being an EMT. I loved the hands-on. I got to help people in their worst moments. I was there. And at the same time, I'm going to school and I'm doing kind of both things, learning to be a police officer and being an EMT. And then one fateful night in November of 1997, my brother and I were going out to run through the physical agility test because I'd missed it. It was a Thursday night and I was supposed to start the police academy on Monday. I had my ID number and everything. And he was loading his gun and it went off and it hit me in the leg. And that ended my police career really quickly. But it also kind of shelves me on the EMT side for a little while. So eventually I decided I wanted to be a dispatcher. There was a dispatcher that dispatched in the county that I was a volunteer EMT, and he was really fun on the radio, and we had a good time. So I applied and eventually became a dispatcher in July of 1999, and I loved it, and it was exciting.
Oh man. Okay. So Kathy, where are you at this time as Jason's going through all of this that happened? And actually, really quick before you answer that, Jason, you said you got shot in the leg? Were you shot like in the kneecap or something, or where?
It went through the side of my femur and came out actually in the knee joint.
Okay, so I hear that's probably the worst place to be shot because
it was a quarter of an inch. If it was a quarter of an inch backwards, it would have hit the artery and I either could have died or lost my leg.
Jeez.
But the way that it blew out the inside of my femur, when I had surgery a few days after being shot, I was told I would never walk again. And that was really hard being 20 years old and hearing that I may never walk again. But eventually I did. And I got back in the gym and tried to go back, and every time I was on a treadmill, something in my knee would tear or it would pop or it would break. And eventually I just gave up at it, trying to go back. But that was how the whole dispatcher thing started.
Oh man. Okay. So before we get into you getting into dispatch there, Kathy, where are you during this time? Like, I guess, when did the two of you meet? Was it in college? Was it there in Maryland? Like, how did that even come about?
Yeah, comedians absolutely love to hear our story for many reasons. So we've known each other for a long time. We knew each other in high school, but we kind of ran with separate crews, and we just crossed paths every once in a while. Oddly enough, he's over here getting rehabbed for his knee, and I'm over here going to school to become a physical therapist assistant, not knowing what had happened over here. Oddly enough, fast forward many years to 2005, he, did a lot of surgeries for his knee. I ended up back at a place where I did a clinical affiliation, and he popped into therapy one day for something unrelated to his knee, and we reconnected through that. And so after he was done being a patient, he was not my patient at the time. I did not hook up with my patient. After he was discharged, we started dating, and that was in 2005. And so he had already become a dispatcher. This was many years after his injury. So that's it.
Wow. I mean, that sometimes fate just kind of works that way. The
It does.
world, the universe, however you want to put it, it
Yeah.
just works that way. And you ended up, what are the odds that he's, going through all this, PT and stuff and hi, you like there you are.
Yep. Yep.
That is pretty interesting. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit before that happens, before you two meet and everything. So, Jason, you're now you've gone through this stuff. You're not going to be out back in the field, and you've got a friend that was in dispatch. Did you get a chance to do like a sit along or anything? Like, had you already seen the inside of the center? Like, did you know what you were getting into?
I had been into the center where my friend worked a few times, just
Mhm.
dropping off, goodies, coffee, whatever. But I never sat with him. But he was a type of friend that we always hung out. So I always heard stories, crazy 911 stories. And, it just got that ball rolling because the degree that I had was useless at that point.
Mhm.
And I figured that I still wanted to do something in public safety to help. And I chose to be a police dispatcher, thinking that if I was a fire dispatcher or an EMS dispatcher, that'd be too much on top of being a volunteer EMT.
Yeah.
So that way I had both sides of the coin. I had, law enforcement, and I had the volunteer fire and EMS side too.
So when you get into dispatch, how big is the area that you're covering, and like how many people are working on the floor at a time?
When I started in 1999, we were in a small like corner of a building. It wasn't even a big center at the time, but
Mhm.
we probably had like 12 people on a shift at that time, 4 different shifts. The county that I dispatched for was right outside of DC. It's Prince George's County, Maryland. And there's between 800,000 and a million people in that one county.
Jeez.
So when I first started, we were on the police side, we were dispatching about 900 calls a day.
Bro. Holy crap. Okay, so were you guys taking like every discipline of public safety, like calls, or were you just on police radio?
Yeah. So when you get hired in Prince George's County, you get
Mhm.
trained on the 911 side first.
Yeah.
And we take everything: police, fire, EMS, non-emergency calls, alarm calls, everything. And when we even took town calls too. I think there's 32 municipalities or something in Prince George's County that we take calls for. So it was a lot.
Oh, geez. Okay, so you end up you end up going through the hiring process and everything. You're starting to train. When you walk in, what is that like just right off the bat? What are you seeing? Is it tons of screens? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Like, oh crap, what did I get myself into?
It
Or
was a
were you
little
down for it?
overwhelming looking at the different monitors. Back then, we didn't have the integrated screens where, you could open different windows. We had different monitors for every computer.
Yeah.
So, and they were huge. They weren't, laptops or flat screens or anything. And the first couple of days, they bring you in because they're so busy. You just kind of sit there and you listen and you kind of hear things. And that first couple of days, it was really busy. My first shift was a Friday night, and my second one was a Saturday night, and it was busy, but nothing really got to me until like the first day I was answering calls by myself. And the first call that I took by myself, it was an FDA building. There were 2 police officers that were arguing. One of them had gotten a promotion, the other one didn't. As the 911 line clicked open, I hear a gunshot. One of the officers had shot the other one in the head. And that was my very first time taking a call by well, I wasn't by myself, but I was actually speaking at that time.
Welcome to dispatch. Wow. So I have said that it seems like whenever we're done with the training process, that first night alone, it's if dispatch was a gang, you're getting beat in. And that right there is that is the definition of it. Holy hell, that's the first one.
Yeah.
And so you end up going through that, and when you're done with it though, do you have a moment to breathe, or do you go to the next one, or is there even a debriefing?
There was no debriefings at that time. I smoke. So I told the person I was sitting with, hey, I need to go outside, use the bathroom, whatever. Well, not pee outside, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I go outside and it's just like, holy fuck, what just happened?
Yeah.
Because back then we weren't E&D trained, we weren't EPD trained, but because I was an EMT, I was able to give CPR instructions over the phone. And doing that over the phone instead of doing it in person was so much different. And it still was an automatic process, but as soon as that call ended and I walked outside, it was like a flood of emotions came over me, and it was hard to deal with. But I had that mentality back then that I'm just going to get up and go back in there and do my job.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of folks that have said something similar where they've had not the exact same type of call, but a hard call in general, and they have said that if they hadn't gone back in to continue, they might not have come back at all. And I man, so how is did you ever have a moment where you were doing kind of a comparison where at one point before the incident that happened with you and your brother, you were on scene, hands on, doing all of these things, but now you're listening and you're putting these pieces together in your head, and you can't be hands on. Was that a hard transition at all?
It was that is what bothered me the most about being a call taker when I was answering calls or when I was dispatching. Hearing the amount of fear and panic in people's voices and the screams, and it came from the phone and the radio too. Knowing that if I was there, I could have maybe made a difference in what the outcome was. Like if there was some magical fucking teleporter that could put me on the scene right when something happened,
Mm-hmm.
I could have stopped the bleeding. I could have, gotten the cord around from the baby's neck or something to prevent what ultimately ended up happening. And it made it worse because as dispatchers and call takers, 90% of the time, even probably higher, we never know what happens at the end unless we actually seek it. So the worst thing is in your mind that you think happened.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times too, what we're putting together in our brains is sometimes worse than what is actually going on out there. And because I remember that I would type in everything that I hear, and then an officer would, send me a message later on and be like, dude, like, I don't know what all you heard. I'm like, well, I typed it all in. You read it. But he's like,
Right.
it wasn't like that when we got out there. I'm like, well, I can only tell you what I am hearing and picturing. And
I
so
tell
you,
people all the time that when you hear things, you have to correlate that into a mental picture in your brain,
Mhm,
not only for the help that you're sending the person that's calling, but you're doing it to protect the people that are going.
mhm.
So you create this really shitty image in your head of what is going on in that house or that business or on the street. And you're right, 9 times out of 10, it's way worse than what actually happened. But you spend those nanoseconds creating that image, and that image a lot of the time sears in your brain and it's stuck there.
Right. Yeah. No, you prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Like that's
Right.
pretty much how that scenario goes through. So you end up going through that, and it's 1999, right? You said that this was in 99, and so like I didn't start dispatching until 2001. And even 2001, and I'm sure 99 when you were there was no talk about resilience, mental health and wellness. Like nobody told me. Like I remember the chief and lieutenant telling me, you're gonna probably take some hard calls, but there wasn't a, take some time for yourself or anything like that. And I think it's also because of, the guard that they came up with. It was kind of the same thing. You go from call to call to call and you continue going. So that was your welcome to dispatch right there. You start going years in, taking phone calls, being on the radio and everything else. um Kathy, what was it like for you when the two of you ended up like dating, getting together, maybe hearing some of these stories, or did you guys even talk about any of that stuff in the beginning?
Oh yeah, I was super curious. I've always had an interest in law enforcement and first responders. My second thing, if I couldn't become a physical therapist assistant, was going to be to join the military and become like a military police officer. But that thank God I didn't ever have to do that. So when we started dating, I knew what he did for a living. I knew about his old injury. You know, I knew a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes. And I did go sit in with him. I sat in with him on one of his midnight shifts, and it was totally confusing to me. All of the call signs and the codes and all of that stuff. I couldn't really wrap my head around it, but it was pretty much nonstop. It was all night long. There was not really a break to be had. And then on the other side of that, one of his buddies asked if I wanted to go on a ride along one night in the same county. And so I went on this ride along, and I'll tell you what, it was quite boring.
Oh,
We went around. There was only one exciting thing that happened. We pretty much drove around. You know, I heard him on the radio, which was kind of cool, sitting in the cruiser listening to him. You know, put out calls and things, and all of a sudden we get a call, and it was an officer in trouble at the local hospital. And apparently there was a guy on PCP who was fighting with an officer. So of course it was an officer in trouble, and everybody and their mother was going to this call. So here we go, lights and sirens on these back roads. And, you know, this cop is typing on the computer as we're doing 100 on back roads. And, you know, we get there, he tells me stay in the car, and there's, you know, it's a sea of blue and red lights. And he went out and basically made sure everybody was good and didn't need his help, and jumped back in the car, and we went about our boring night. So in comparison, it was kind of interesting to see that his job was so intense, and so it never, like, we were up here and we never really came down. And it was the opposite for his friend in this ride along, where it was kind of like, and then, you know, back to kind of putzing around, what was then FedEx Stadium or whatever it was, where the Redskins play. So yeah, that was exciting to get a little bit of a background. But beyond that, he didn't really talk about calls. He would come home after a shift, and you know, we'd eat, or we'd go to Applebee's, or when we had our kid, we'd, you know, do the family thing. And he didn't really say much. He'd just come home and just kind of do his thing. I don't know if he was trying to protect me or what was going on, but I never really heard about the calls. You know, it was a couple of the really bad ones that I heard about, but he didn't really get into detail with them. And I'm sure he'll share a couple of those with you.
But the majority of time in the beginning, I would go to work, and then sometimes I'd go to the firehouse and ride the ambulance the rest of the night. So I was steadily up on an adrenaline rush. And it took me going to another program to realize that I was addicted to adrenaline at one point. And even when I wasn't doing either one of those things, there was shit that I would do just for a rush, but I didn't know I was doing it for a rush, you know? So yeah.
And we drank, and, you know, we did all the normal things, I think. And, you know, and like you said, with your son, not missing something that, you know, wasn't around.
Yeah.
You know, he was there, but he wasn't there. So I'm sure that our son Wesley probably had a similar feeling at some point. And I know his older son probably also shares some of that sentiment, you know. And you cook dinner, you go to bed, you get up, go to work, and, you know, you do the grind. So
yeah, no, for sure. I can agree with the you know, the whole adrenaline rush thing too, because once you come down, that's when everything starts coming back. And you want to stay up at the top, because then everything is just going and going and going, and you don't have a chance to really let some of that stuff seep in. I remember really quick, were you working 8 hours or 12-hour shifts?
We were working 2 12-hour days. We had a 24-hour break, and then we'd work 2 12-hour nights. and then we had a 4-day break. But working overtime, being at the firehouse, everything, that didn't equal a lot of time being at home doing other things.
Yeah.
When I was at home, I was doing, yard work or, something to stay busy.
Mm-hmm.
I could never sit still because, like you said, when you start slowing down, that all that stuff comes back. But you're also exhausted, like physically exhausted, and then that stuff comes in your head, and then you can't rest. So then you get up and start doing other things again.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle, and I lived about 45 minutes from the dispatch center. I did not live in the county that I worked in, even though I grew up in that county. I did not live in the county because the way my wife would put it, ignorance is bliss. And we don't want to know what all of
Right.
our neighbors are doing that are around us, and of course, if they knew where I worked, that too. So there would be times where I would work a 12-hour shift, sometimes a 16-hour shift if somebody called in, and then I have 45 minutes driving home. And you end up, if I'm not listening to music, it's just complete silence. And I would go into basically autopilot mode where I would get to a certain portion of my drive home and I would snap out of that autopilot and think, how did I even get this far? Like,
Right.
that is scary. And there were
One
those moments.
I remember you had asked about being in the beginning. I didn't work in the same county. The county that I worked in was north of me.
Uh-huh.
I knew that county had crime, but I don't remember if it was like the first week or whatever. But I remember coming home one night, crossing the county line, coming back at home and thinking, holy shit, like, I can't believe the shit that goes on in this county every night. The people that live in the county south of us have no clue what is going on up here.
Yeah.
Because there were so many things, the news can only cover a couple things, but it was 30 times worse than anybody could have ever imagined, the stuff that was going on in that county. And it blew my mind.
It's it's weird when you are working in a place where you only know what you know, right? You see stuff in the news. However, when you get into dispatch, then you know all the tea, and you know that there's more stuff that's going on, stuff that you would have never thought of. And I've told a few people this, but it's kind of really stuck with me. But it's based off this meme that I saw that I thought, mind blown, holy crap, because you don't ever think about it as a kid, but think about Scooby-Doo, okay? Scooby-Doo, they're chasing around these monsters, right? And what do they all end up being at the end? Human. It's like monsters are real, but they're all human.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically what you kind of realize in public safety and stuff, especially in 911. You've got these people that are calling that are just some of the most horrific shit sometimes. And you just wonder, like, damn, is this real life? And you're like, yeah, it is. But yeah, as a kid, you don't think about it. But as an adult, when you see it, you're like, oh, shit. Like, they were kind of telling us right off the bat, like, yeah, monsters are real, but they're
Right.
human.
Yeah.
It's
And
the craziest thing.
The stuff you hear, you get these small little moral injuries along the way, because you're right. There are monsters, but when they take that mask off, it's a human, but they're doing monsterific, if that's even a fucking word.
Yeah.
That you can't believe that one human would do to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, what you mentioned as the first call that you took when you were on your own, like that alone, it's like, what? And it continues and continues. But, we're the ones that are there. I always tell people, like, our voices might sound like we're not like there with our feelings and such, but in the back of our minds, we're freaking out with that caller as well, because we're empaths. We put ourselves in their shoes so that we can understand what it is that's going on, to build that trust, build that rapport as fast as we can to get them help. But that stays with us as well, because then you start thinking, like, what if that was me? What if that was my family? What
Right.
if we were in that? So, and I know we talked about this in the beginning before we started recording, but for those who are watching and listening, if you feel comfortable enough, a call that kind of sticks with you.
So there's a lot. after that one, I remember, and I'll touch on some of these briefly. The girl next to me had taken a suicide call. A girl was threatening suicide. She was driving around, and she had been upset that, she thought that she was to blame for her son's death. Her son had ended up dying of SIDS. Mm-hmm. And when she said her name, I knew her. So I had plugged in and listened to that call, and they were trying to track her down, trying to find her. And she ended up going to a cemetery and killing herself. And that was a friend of mine. I worked on 9/11. I worked right outside of Washington, D.C., where Andrews Air Force Base is. And I was working the north part of the county. And right after the second plane hit the World Trade Center, I had a town officer call out with the tail number of the plane that ended up hitting the Pentagon. We had called Andrews and tried to warn them, and they knew. And then it was just, after that, it kind of fell into a cycle where we were busy all night. There were some nights I was holding carjackings because I didn't have enough people to send. I would dispatch, we would have high-speed chases that lasted hours. I had one high-speed chase that turned into two, from one coming out of D.C., one coming into Prince George's County, and our two helicopters almost hit each other because they were on the same exact road. So I was trying to deal with two chases at the same time. But the one that really kind of put us on our journey where we are now, March 7th, 2015, I was doing lunch breaks that night. It was really cold in Maryland. And we got a call for an officer down. I pulled the call up. It was a blue call. That's how our calls come in. And the only thing that it said was there was a wrecked cruiser in the backyard of somebody's house. None of my officers had called out. So I sent 2 units and the supervisor over there. And I remember telling them, it's really icy. Be careful. I need you to get there, but I need you to get there safe to let me know what's going on. And as soon as they got there, they called out and said that he didn't make it. And that was really tough. I knew that it was probably going to happen at some point in my career. I hope that it wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And it was like a gut punch. I felt like there was, even though that I didn't take that call or anything, I still felt like there was something like I could have done, but it wasn't. And I just sat there and it was like the whole world went quiet at one time. Like I couldn't hear anybody else dispatching. I couldn't hear anything. And I remember thinking, like, somebody's going to come check on me, ask me if I'm okay. Nobody ever did. I sat there, and the girl who I was doing her lunch break for, she came back in to take her channel back, and I told her, I said, I'm going to keep this. I need you to finish doing the lunch breaks. I don't think that's fair for me to do that. Mm-hmm. And this happened, I think, at like 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So I told the officer, not the officer, the captain that ended up showing up. I said, I'm going to stay here until you all get him out of the car and he's being escorted to the medical examiner's office. And the reason I told him that was when I first started dispatching, I made a promise to myself that I would never leave anybody on the street. So that was one of the things that came to my mind, was that I couldn't leave him in the car and go home and do something that he can't anymore. So I ended up staying probably until, I think I stayed 5 hours past my time off. And I went home and I started watching the news. Like that would make it better, and then started seeing like pictures of the cruiser and everything else. And I didn't sleep that night, and I went back to work.
You went back that night.
I went back that night and thinking, not thinking, but I was hoping in the back of my mind that somebody would say, hey, I know you had a rough night. You were here 5 hours extra. Why don't you take the night off? Why don't you, go do something else? Mm-hmm. And that didn't happen. I went to work. Nobody said anything to me. We didn't talk about it. We didn't do anything. And I worked that entire night like nothing had happened. But in the back of my mind, it's just nagging at me.
Oh, jeez. Well, no matter how much time has passed, my condolences. I'm sorry that happened, but also that I guess people weren't mindful enough to see what was going on and to give you a chance or a moment to step away or even take that time off. Kathy, for you, and I know you have to leave here soon, but I just wanted to ask. Well, a lot of this stuff was going on. I mean, for you, from your side, when did you start noticing maybe kind of like some distance or maybe something was just kind of off? I don't know. However you want to put it. Like, when did you start noticing some differences?
It was only in really looking back at everything over the past several years that I, even in retrospect, noticed anything that wasn't normal behavior or however you want to call it. I do remember that night. I remember him. Well, that day he was supposed to be home at 7 o'clock in the morning, but like he said, he didn't get home until much later. So I only knew that he was staying late. And when he got home, said, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "No, it was a shitty night." And he went into the bedroom and closed the door. And he came back out when he was ready to go back to work that night. And that was it. I didn't find out until I think it was the next day that he actually said that, there was an officer that was killed in a vehicle accident. And that was it. Like I didn't get anything. I didn't get anything. There was no emotion. There was no anger. There was no sadness. It was just it was just blankness. I didn't know how to take it. I'm like, oh, okay. Or what do we do? What can we do? And it wasn't until the officer's funeral that the emotion was there. And Jason was also tasked within his department to do the final calls for a lot of officers, starting back with one of his best friends who was killed in the line of duty. I think that was your first final call, was his best friend, and that happened back in 2010. And then he did the final call for a few more officers, and hearing him do the final call. Some of them were pre-recorded. Some of them he did live from the graveside. They would set up an intercom type system, and they would play this final call over everybody's radios. And those were the toughest parts. That's, I think, where the most emotion was for me, and knowing the depth of the calls that he was taking and the losses that they were feeling.
I did 5 total.
Yeah. Oh, and I actually, on our website, I do have the 2 of the recordings there. And I have those because part of it is because I want people to hear it. When you hear taps, there's just something about hearing taps. There's something about hearing these final calls that it brings a realness, just a realness to it. So we do have those couple recorded that people can listen to, but yeah, I don't know how to describe how he would come home those nights, because there was nothing to describe. Like he was empty.
You just bury it, and because that you still have a job to do, you still have a wife and kids that you have to take care of, and that call was a catalyst for a few other ones, and these all by themselves over the years really didn't bother me, but after Brendan Rebane was killed, it kind of compounded everything. And also the guy ran over. They chased that guy down, shot and killed him. Had an officer shot. They chased him down and killed him. I had an officer get rammed in a cruiser, got hurt really bad. I knew them. There was a bank robbery that I had kind of weirdly, they didn't know that it was going to happen. It was an auto theft thing that kind of happened, and they came out and they shot and killed 3 of them. That was over a 9-month period. And it felt like a snowball going. And I eventually felt like I was on a train that I couldn't get off of. And all of these things started swirling in my head, but I never talked about them. I didn't do anything. And the times that I did need a break or I did need to get away from the channel, I remember being yelled at for being outside 5 minutes longer than I should have been. And you know, one of the times that toward the end there, I finally snapped and said, I've had a lot of shitty stuff happen to me in the last 9 months. I sometimes I just need a fucking break. And that led to a mandatory appointment with oh man,
It was like the
I can't remember what the name of it is.
The EAP.
Yep, EAP, mandatory EAP referral. And it said in my mind thinking, maybe they care and they're sending me there. I thought it was a punishment. So when I went to my mandated one, I didn't say anything. I just told them I'm fine. It just, you know, I lurched out because I hadn't been sleeping and I was tired and I wasn't feeling good that day. It had nothing to do with work, and that and it appeased them, you know, for a while, and that eventually led into becoming physically ill and physical pain and throwing up and just not sleeping, and eventually in 2015, 2016, and 2017, I was in the hospital more than I was out. And
that's where we really lost him was 2016.
And even in the hospital, when I was admitted to the hospital, I would get calls from people like, why aren't you at work? I'm like, you know, I'm in the fucking hospital. I'm sick. Like, and I understand being short and, you know, it puts additional work on other people. But there was no correlation. Like they knew that I had been sent to EAP, and then, you know, you give me shit for being sick. I didn't correlate it either. It wasn't until, well, let me back up a minute. They had diagnosed me with porphyria, which is a vampire disease from the 1500s, where the whole vampire story came from.
Allergic to the sun.
Yeah. So it's a blood disorder where you need hemocrit.
It's something
Like that.
It was
that's in blood to make you feel better. And all of these things, because my levels had been up when they drew my blood, my porphyrins were elevated. Well, they weren't elevated because I had porphyria. They were elevated because I was dehydrated from throwing up so much. And finally, I get a hematologist, and he comes in my room, and we're talking. And he's like, well, what do you do again? And I'm a dispatcher, but that's not it. I'm sick. I have all this pain. And he goes, well, I think that you're sick because of being a dispatcher. And I said, no. He said, I think you're anxious. What did shit. I'm losing myself here.
No. You're good.
I think you're sick because you're anxious and you're depressed. And I said, no, I'm anxious and depressed because I'm sick.
Right.
Not because of what's happening. And he goes, no, I think you have PTSD, but I can't diagnose you with it. I know this guy in Baltimore. You need to go see him. He's an amazing forensic psychologist. Go see him. So we made an appointment and we drive up there. It's nighttime. It was actually snowing in Maryland that time, which it barely snows in Maryland. It was cold. And we get in there, and Within 15 minutes, he cuts Kathy and I off and he goes, "You have one of the worst cases of chronic PTSD I've ever seen. I've never seen it physically manifest like it has in you."
Yeah.
And that started that ball rolling onto that.
Holy shit. Okay, hold on a minute. We we gotta back up a little bit here. So you go from being fucking Nosferatu, Dracula to
We love that show, by the way.
you go from being that to now you find out that you have PTSD. And you know what's interesting too, and for people who are watching and listening, this I I was talking to a clinician as well a while back that I had on an episode. I think it was just a couple of years ago. I had her on this episode, and I had been reading through her book, and I was reading about some of the secondary trauma of PTSD and you know and all this other stuff and how it affects you and how it can cause like IBS and like all of these different things. And before her and I started recording, like right before like the three of us when we were talking right before we started recording, I said to her, I said, "Are you telling me that all of this stomach bullshit that I was dealing with is probably because of these calls that I was taking that were
Right.
really, really hard and messing with me?" And she's like, "Yeah." And, you know, she was explaining, you know, more about it and stuff. It wasn't just, you know, cut and dry like that, but it was part of it. And I thought, no way. I'm like, holy hell. And when I did go to the doctor for some of the issues that I was having, I remember, excuse me, my family doctor, we were talking about my high blood pressure, and he goes, "You didn't have high blood pressure before you started dispatch." And I said, "No, I didn't." And he goes, well, actually, before you started this new job, because at the time he didn't know what I was doing yet. Because one of the things he was saying, because I was dealing with a bunch of pain on my body as well, and nobody could explain it. And he says, "Well, you need to be less stressed when you're at work." And I said, "Do you know what I do for a living?" And he goes, "No, Ricardo, no, I've known you my whole life, you know, since you were a kid." He goes, "But I don't know what you do for a living now." And I said, "I'm a 911 dispatcher." And he goes, "Well, I guess you can't be less stressed, can you?" And he's like, "Here's your script for your high blood pressure." I was like, "Gee," but yeah. So so again, for those who are watching, listening, not one of us are doctors. We are just talking to you from our experiences,
Mhm.
but yeah, that is the craziest thing, that the trauma, the stress, especially the stress, all of that can cause so many different things. So here's the next question then. The both of you are there with the doctor, telling you about this the worst case of chronic PTSD you've ever seen manifesting in your body and everything else. What are your thoughts? Is this like a huge light bulb moment, like holy hell, or what's going on at this point now?
It took a while.
It took a while.
Yeah.
Like there was a flicker of a light bulb, like
Mhm.
you know, maybe because
Didn't really believe it.
I had been a dispatcher at that time for 18 years.
Yeah.
A majority of that time, I was also a volunteer EMT, so I was getting it from both sides. I was seeing it and I was hearing it, but I thrived under pressure.
Yeah.
I loved my job. I loved being an EMT. When the shit was going down, like that, I wanted to be that guy that took every fucking bad call because I was so good at what I did and so organized, and you know, all of us create our own OCD too, right? So I just had this way of dealing with them, and when there was a favorable outcome, then I felt better. But it started emptying my glass to a point where when it was you know half empty, instead of getting filled back up, it kept going down.
Yeah, he was thriving under all of this pressure until he wasn't. Right. So until 2016, where we can look back and say, okay, he was on his way to work when he would have to pull over and throw up. And then he would have this, you know, wave of these symptoms, and he'd have to turn around and come home. And then that's where, like, for a couple of days, he would be so sick that we were in the emergency room, and then we were home, and then he'd try to go to work. And it was this back and forth where he was trying to go to work and his brain and his body were saying, no, you don't, because if you go to work, something bad is going to happen. And it was almost like it was saving him, because he would get sick on the way home or on the way to work, and he'd come home. And then we were in the ER, and then we were at the doctor's office, and then we were admitted to the hospital for a week, and then we were running tests. And at 35 years old, he had every specialist that you can have. He had primary care, he had pain management, he had an orthopedic surgeon for the gunshot wound to the knee that ended up being a knee replacement. He different story for a different day, was attacked by a dog, so he had trauma to his hand. And he had a cardiologist, and he had an endocrinologist, and he had a GI doctor, and he had a neurologist, and he had everything, and he had nothing. Like, we had no answers for so long. The porphyria thing really took us for a loop. I was doctor Googling a lot, and having a medical background, I know it's not the right thing to do, but I would call his doctors and say, what about this? What about this? Let's run a test for this. Let's run a test for that. And because nothing was working, like they would come up with something, and then they would try something, and it wouldn't work.
But the porphyria thing kind of,
it fit for a while.
It fit because I was in so much pain, the GI stuff, and the treatments that they were giving me. I was on so much pain medicine, I could have killed a herd of elephants. Mm-hmm. And I was on GI medicine, and I was on a buttload of sugar, because sugar is a treatment for porphyria.
That's right.
So I would get all this energy from not being in pain and having sugar highs and all this other shit, and I would feel better. So I thought that's what it was. And I thought this diagnosis is a godsend, because now I know what it is. But the more I started getting admitted, they're like, okay, we need to start controlling why you're having so many attacks, because it was like every 20 to 30 days I would be in the hospital, and they would, pump me full of chemicals and pain meds and drugs and blood pressure meds. And I'd feel great. And they're like, all right, your attack's over, go home. And then I go to work for a little while, and then it would start again, and then I'd be back in the hospital. So when the diagnosis of PTSD came, we're taught our whole lives that you can't have mental episodes being in public safety, because you need to be mentally strong for the people that call, the people you're dispatching for. So it's almost like, shame on you, you have this thing. Mm-hmm. So it took us a while to accept that. Mm-hmm. And even when we accepted it, not everybody else did.
Yeah. He was treated at one point. So he was on FMLA. He ran out of leave. A lot of officers were very gracious and donated leave, to the point that, everybody kind of was tapped out. And when he finally got this diagnosis, his work said, all right, you're not allowed up here. Like, do not step foot on the premises. Like, he was contagious. That's literally what it felt like.
The director of public safety wrote me a letter banning me from all county property.
Like you're a liability or something?
Right.
Like he was going to pass it on to the other.
Like dispatchers. I had COVID when COVID didn't exist. Like I was going to end up infecting everybody else. But they had doctor's notes, they would write, when I started seeing psychology and stuff, they're like, all right, give them 30 days. We're going to work through some stuff. And then they would be like, okay, well, we understand you need to be off for 30 days, but you need to call out sick every day too.
Yeah. They wanted him to physically call out sick on the days he was scheduled to work. So it became, I think they were really trying to just get him to just stop working. Right. And ultimately that's what happened. They did end up firing him, but so we don't go into too much, on a whole different, there's a whole different side of this too.
And I know that it wasn't personal, right? But I think, like Kathy said, they were trying to contain something from maybe spreading, like somebody else would be like, oh shit, he has that. Maybe and then it causes a snowball. But it's also poor education and poor, at the time, bad stigma and they didn't know how to deal with that stuff then.
And they could have really utilized, I think, what was going on with us as a training tool. And I think they probably have looked back now and probably have. But, we did end up, we had to hire a lawyer. We were able to get his physicians on board to link the illness with his job. So it then became an on-the-job related injury, i.e. work comp. So again, a whole different kind of side of the, what we had to deal with on top of all of the physical and mental things. But he was awarded his job back, and then he was able to retire. And then there was things that happened with the retirement because it was a cumulative injury and it wasn't just one episode. He didn't qualify for full retirement. Again, like this, we could go down a whole nother side street with that and with and things like that. So, so we don't get too much on a funky trail with that. When the diagnosis came through and we were able to really start saying, okay, what do we do with this information? What do we do? How do you treat a mental illness? Because we knew how to treat high blood pressure. We knew how to treat cholesterol, but what do we do with this? It was new for both of us. And we found counselors, and the counselors were, they were okay. Social workers with cute little degrees. They're great. I love them. They're useful for a lot of things, but
when I would bring the PTSD thing up, they're like, no, we don't say that in here.
Yeah, they did
and
not
I'm
want
like,
to talk about
okay,
it.
well, I kind of need to know what I have so I can mentally work with that. And they're like, no, we don't really diagnose stuff. We just listen.
Yeah.
So
it's like George Carlin's words that you can't say on TV.
Right.
Yeah. Like that.
Yep.
So
we did end up going through a few different counselors, and we didn't really get anywhere. And we ended up finding, and I don't even know how we found him, but Dr. Keaton, out of a physical therapy / mental health, behavioral type of combination, about an hour from our house. I don't know how we got there, but we got there. We got in to see this man, and he was the first person that set us up for success. It was not just him. He would listen to me. He would listen to Jason. Jason went in weekly. They were standing appointments. It was amazing. Even when Jason would not feel like going, he would still go because he knew that Dr. Keaton was good medicine. So unfortunately,
So Dr. Keaton, like Kathy said, we don't know how we found him, but he came from Fayetteville, South Carolina,
North Carolina,
some
Carolina.
One of the Carolinas, yeah.
He had gotten hired as the psychologist in charge of the CSM team, CSIM.
Yeah,
CSM team. And when he was talking to the sheriff, he said, okay, I need a rep for the 911 center. And the sheriff said, why? And he goes, because they need to be involved in these debriefings too. And so his whole thing was, he knew from an early start that dispatch and call taking was a very integral part of critical incident stress stuff that happened. So he was one of the first psychologists in the country that included 911 centers in their debriefings. So somehow he had moved up here. I think it was for family or whatever. And we found him. And, it was lucky on my part.
Yeah.
Our part.
But unfortunately, at that time, there needed to be something more happening with Jason because he was very sick. And unfortunately, we got put in to see a psychiatrist who basically prescribed a medicine.
The initial guy was fine. He didn't overprescribe. He wasn't, he talked more than he wrote. He was good.
But he prescribed nonetheless.
And he decided that he was going to leave to focus on his inpatient clinic and he hired like 3 people to take his place. That's how busy this guy was. So then I started seeing people, but not the same person every time. So it would like rotate. I would go 1, 2, 3, and then rotate back. And as soon as I'd walk in, they're like, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, like, "Shit. All right, well, you're on this medicine. We're going to double this one. We're going to add this." And eventually it got to the point where I was on 15 different medications at one time. And
jeez,
from that, it was, okay, you can't sleep because of the side effects. We'll add something else. You can't wake up. We'll give you an upper.
It was the Marilyn Monroe kind of situation.
Like my blood pressure started going up because psych meds can cause high blood pressure. I'm not a doctor. I know this from experience. So the primary care doctor said, "Hey, start taking blood pressure medicine."
Mm-hmm.
I started taking that and I started passing out. Hit my head, falling in the bathroom. I remember walking in the dining room one time. I fell, I hit my head on the dining room table, and I fell to the left in our house because on the right side we had a sliding glass door, but no deck. There was just some stupid, flimsy little gate there. If I'd have fallen to the right, it would have went out the second story window and probably be dead. But the worst part of that was I fell in front of my son. And that's when...
That was my final straw. This was, oh goodness, leading up to about 2018, 2017, 2018. Like he said, he was on 15 different medications. I was trying to navigate the medications. I was trying to navigate his primary care with all of these appointments. But let me tell you, when you're on 15 different psych meds, you're a zombie. When I would come home from work, I would get our son from daycare. I would get meals prepped. I would get the kid in the bathtub. I would get the kid in bed, all before I would open up the bedroom door. So he slept 20 hours a day at this point. So from the time he was diagnosed with PTSD through getting put on 15 different meds every single day, he became a zombie. He literally slept 20 hours a day. He was not working at this time. He was not functioning at this time. It wasn't until the end of the night that I would open up that bedroom door and look in and either listen for him breathing or see maybe the sheets kind of rising a little bit with his breathing. I was terrified every day I came home from work to open up the bedroom door because I didn't know what I was going to find. I never thought that he was suicidal. He never talked about that kind of thing. I thought it was going to be an accidental overdose. I thought that the meds that he was on were just going to kill him while he was sleeping. And, when he would get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, there were episodes where I would just hear this big crash and I'd walk in and, the curtain rod would be down and he would just be a heap on the floor. And it was because these medications they were killing him. There's a really good picture. I think it's on our website. I share it with a lot of folks, but there's a picture that shows what he looked like in November of 2019 on 15 different meds and what he looked like a year and a half later when he was finally off of all of that. And he's not even the same person. And we attribute that to the next phase of our journey when I finally said enough is enough. Like, I'm not going to have a husband soon. We were so fortunate. My son and I, we had this.
The kicker on this one is, so Maryland at the time decided that they were going to pass their medical marijuana thing. My primary care doctor jumped on that bandwagon. And he knew that I was in psychiatry and he knew that I was not right because I'd been seeing him, ever since before I got sick. And he goes, "Hey, why don't we add some marijuana to your cocktail to try to get that worked out?" So not only was it 15 meds, but I was smoking weed at the end of the night too. Mm-hmm. Hence why I was sleeping 20 fucking hours a day.
Man.
Even without the weed, you were sleeping. And he had stopped drinking by like 2011. He didn't even drink anymore at this point. So that's the sad part of it all. I was drinking because you weren't drinking.
You were drinking his portion.
I was definitely drinking his portion. But we got very, very, very lucky in 2019, the end of 2019. Our son and I, and actually as a family at some point before all this, we would go to the county fair, and best county fair ever in Charles County, Maryland. Let me just tell you, Krispy Kreme donuts with a cheeseburger in between the two. It's phenomenal. It's the best county fair ever. But Wesley and I went that particular time. Jason was too sick to go, and we did our rounds. We come through the little area where there's all these promotional booths, right? You know, like a Within the Trenches podcast booth would be over here, you know, giving away little freebies and talking about who they are. And, you know, the firefighters over here giving away free stuff. And so we came across this booth and it said Warfighter Advance. And it's like, oh, what are you guys about? And this older gentleman starts talking to me about what they do. And I said, oh, well, you guys just take military, huh? And he said, yeah, right now we basically deal with military people who are dealing with PTSD and over medication. And I was like, oh, well, that's sad that you don't take first responders. And he was like, well, you know, we've talked about it and it's something we've considered. And I said, well, my husband is really sick right now and I'm looking for anything. And so I told him Jason's name. He says, oh, Jason Lott. I know that name. I used to run with him at the firehouse. I didn't know he was that sick. Holy moly. You know? And so we got to chatting, and this gentleman, Jim, he says, let me talk to the director and see what we can do. And she got a hold of me the following week and said, Jason needs to be at the next evolution. And so I filled out the application and basically got the dates for it. It was, 45 minutes down the road. He didn't even have to fly in. He just could go and drive and go through this little program, which again is a whole nother discussion. But he got cornered one day. I said, you're going to go to this program. And he was like, I am. Okay. So I sent him off to this program, and it's not a medical detox. There's a whole, again, caveat to it. There's a whole side hustle with the Warfighter Advance thing, but he came back and he had a little glimmer in his eye. And I was like, holy shit, I got my husband back. Like this program saved his life. And again, it's something we can definitely discuss on a different episode if you want, but the Warfighter Advance program, showed him that there is something else out there besides being on 15 different psych meds. There's a group of people who you can surround yourself with that will listen to you, and they will hear your stories if you so choose to tell them, right? The story is sacred, as they say there. So shortly after he came back from that program, we made the ultimate decision to move the hell out of Dodge. And we moved up to Michigan because we needed to get away from all of that. We needed to get away from the lights and the sirens and the people and the, all of those triggering things that can happen. And we came up here, and he slowly detoxed, and he went back to that Warfighter program about a year and a half after his first evolution. And they didn't even recognize him. They thought that he certainly would have died after the first one because he was so sickly. But he survived, and now he's a mentor in the program. He's deputy event coordinator and does all this great stuff and gives back to the program that saved his life. So there's my little thing about that.
You kind of ran on there for a little bit.
Yeah. So, that is good. We're here for your story, and I'm glad.
That's how it progressed. We went from this sickly human in 2016 to this even more sickly human because he was on all of this medication and on the brink of death essentially. And we brought him out of that. Well, in the process of bringing him out of that, we decided that we could not let any other dispatchers go through what we went through. So we had to start telling our story, and we had to start telling people it's okay to talk about it. And it's okay if you're a dispatcher and you're struggling. And, what can we do to help? How can we help you? And that's kind of where we are today, is telling our story and trying to help other people.
Listening to this entire story, it appears that there's definitely a whatever you want to call it, the universe at play here.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking about from the beginning of your story, how the two of you ended up coming together, just by chance, you end up in the same place. You're there. You get together. All of these things are going on. Jason, you start getting really sick. All of these things are happening. Kathy, the way you put it, it was like his body, in a way, was saving his life from going in because of those moments. And I tell people all the time, because I've gone through some shit as well. Not exactly the same as you, but I understand those moments. I tell people, listen to your body, because if you don't listen to your body, one day your body is going to make you listen, and then you have to fight. And it feels like, again, universe, whatever you want to call it, your body is telling you, and you are continuing to go on and go on. You just happen to be at this function, and there's a person there who actually knows Jason. Again, just a chance. And now you are doing things to give back. And I love you gave me goosebumps when you said that when he came back, there was a shimmer in his eye and you had your husband back. And I love how the two of you just really stuck together through this whole thing. And which is probably one of the most important things here as well in this story. Not just the recovery, not just everything, but the fact that the both of you stuck this out and just continued to fight and continued to fight. And again, now you're giving back. And the way you're giving back is with a Thin Gold Line Foundation. How did this idea even come up?
Pretty much like that. Well, when he was forced into medical retirement, I felt kind of bad in early 2019. He was still pretty sick, and he was signing paperwork. He's retiring, and I look and I see all these police officers retiring, and there's these big parties and these big celebrations, and I'm like, that's really not a time to be partying and celebrating the fact that he's retiring, because it's kind of being forced. It's very medical in nature. But I wanted to do something for him that showed, one, I respect that you did all of this, this time in this profession that almost killed you. And then two, I want a small group of your friends and family to be around to say, congratulations, you survived.
Right.
And at this point, I still didn't even know if he was going to survive, because it was early 2019. And I was still hopeful he was going to make it through, but wasn't quite sure. And I went online and I made this nonprofit. I literally signed up for, nonprofit status, made the name, had a friend of his through the department, his wife helped me make a website and make a little Facebook thing. And we kept it on the down low, and then surprised him one day with this little teeny tiny retirement party. And, oh, hey, by the way, you're the president of this organization now called the Thin Gold Line Foundation. And you're going to go and you're going to save other dispatchers from going through what we're going through right now. Because it was a sad country song up to that point, Ricardo. It was literally, he lost his job. We almost lost our house, because when he wasn't working, we weren't making mortgage payments. Like we were, we struggled. We went to the food banks. We drove shitty cars for a while, and, we had to go to the Goodwill store to put shoes on the kids' feet.
It's bad when you go to Target because you have a Target credit card to buy a Visa gift card so you can put gas in your car. Yeah. Like that's how we were robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
And even years later, when we sold our house in Maryland, we got a surprise at closing. They're like, well, you have this like $30,000 side loan on your mortgage.
Like, oh, fuck,
and I looked
we
at
forgot about
Kathy and
that.
I'm like, where the fuck did that come from? And she's like, you don't remember like
like refinancing is
modifying the mortgage? And I'm like, no.
Yeah. So
we had like a little $30,000 fucking debt on there that.
Oops, I forgot about that. Yeah. So I made this organization. I founded the organization basically to say, hey, we're in this together. We're going to try and support other dispatchers. And once it wasn't until we moved up here and really we read the books. We read Tim Adams' book. We've read Jim Marshall's book. You know, we read the books. We started to understand what healing and what coping and what resiliency and what all of these things meant. And, you know, we were having more light bulb moments like, okay, this is how we can help. This is how we can, you know.
And what it means besides diving into bottles, whether it's alcohol
right.
or drugs or, you know, zombie
or the
yourself
prescription
with
medicine.
Psych meds.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the prescription meds weren't even, you know, something that should have been the route. We shouldn't have been down that road. We should have never been on 15 different psych meds. You know, we should have just never been there. There was something that could have been done so much earlier on in this journey that would have prevented or possibly, you know, changed a little bit of what happened. And it's just
acceptance of what happened.
Yeah.
Like if the people that I was around and that I worked for, again, they didn't know at the time, but if there was a more wider acceptance for shit happens, you know, you're reacting normally to an abnormal situation, you know, then, hey, talk about it. Go to a support groups, talk, you know, let it out when you're ready, you know, work through these things, you know, slowly come back to work. I got fucking drugged out of my job.
Yeah.
Because my memory right now is still bad, but then I don't even know how the fuck I drove places and didn't kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would remember walking in the house with groceries being like, where did I just go? Like I would have to look at the bag to see where I went. That's how drugged up I was.
Yeah. So here we are, you know, at 2020 in Oscoda, Michigan, we really started to put everything we had into it. And, you know, we put together the books that we used, and we put together morale boosting swag, if you will. And we started putting resources down. We started putting Frontline Strong Together down as a resource for people on the website, and all of these other tools that we started to learn about, and, you know, these programs and these educational things and these training things, and the NINA and APCO conference. And there's just so much, and it's just been just building and building and building. But
we've come across, you know, happenstance, like you were talking about, people in the right places. You know, Joni Mitchell, who runs
Joni Harvey.
Sorry, Joni Harvey. See, my memory is shit. Anyways, she's the.
Leave me to the names, honey.
What is she again?
She's the administrator of the 911.
She's the Michigan State Administrator for 911.
Right.
Like,
he knows who she is.
Yeah, Joni's a good friend of mine. She actually just recently left from there, but
so we just happened to meet her, and now we're a resource under the Michigan State Police tab.
Yeah.
Under their resource tab.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
You know, and it's not still without a fight. Like the PTSD isn't something that goes away. It's something that sticks with you. You learn how to live, and the damage that all of those years did to me physically, being so sick and being on so many fucking medications.
There's
like,
permanency to a lot of it.
Though, you know, people say, you know, you're safe, and nothing is a free. You know, I have memory issues. Like, I know it sounds stupid, but my hair went gray in like 2 months. My eyes went bad. My teeth are bad. It can be 60 degrees outside. I'm outside working in the yard. I sweat through shirts because my adrenal glands are damaged. There's still things that I have to work around on top of still dealing with the PTSD because, I can't read something one day, it triggers something that happened because I know the vision problem is from starting in PTSD stuff. So but having the foundation and working with Warfighter and some of the other things, small things that Kathy and I do to help around the community.
It's therapeutic.
Yes.
We're filling our glass back up like we talked about earlier, where it just kept being emptied. Now we're putting liquid back in it to fill it back up.
And it's the good adrenaline,
And the foundation started as, mental health awareness and helping to give resources and showing a little bit of appreciation. But as we do it, even though we're small, we find out that there's other problems. There's dispatchers that are in need. There's dispatchers that get cancer. There's dispatchers
that are killed in the line of duty. And there's no database for that at all. There's one organization that voluntarily takes numbers for suicides called First Help, but there's no database for that. So we started giving to dispatchers in need. We support GoFundMe pages. We've created memorial plaques for those that we know that have died in the line of duty. We give one to the family, one to the center. So it's even though it's only the two of us, we're slowly trying to get to the size of the Thin Blue Line and the Thin Red Line foundations. But we don't want to get so big that, we're on TV asking for donations and only 10% of it goes to the mission and the 90% goes to administrative costs.
Right.
We like the grassroots of it, but it's still it's a struggle sometimes. But like you said, we started off with the mental health stuff. We give the resource baskets. We now support and are able to give monetary donations to families that have lost houses in house fires, families that are going through cancer treatments, dispatchers that are killed sitting at their consoles, that have medical issues. Just so many different things now that we're kind of fanning out and doing, and bringing people on board and asking people for help. That's actually quite hard for me to do, is ask people to help us with this. But by you doing this podcast and getting our story out there, it's not costing anybody anything, really. I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of things, there's cost associated with it, but we're not asking for Motorola to give us $10,000 so we can tell our story. We're just trying to get out there, get the story out there, and grow a little bit, just enough so we can keep supporting the main mission.
And one of the really important missions we have, another happenstance meeting, we came across our state representative at a town parade, and Kathy put a bug in his ear saying, "Hey, how come dispatchers aren't recognized as first responders in Michigan?" He goes, "They aren't." Right. So we started talking to him, and we've had several meetings with him, and he's telling us that he's going to introduce the bill in the Michigan Assembly at the beginning of the year to try to get it through. So
that's amazing.
Very closely.
Hopefully that will kind of
set things more in motion, but it helped. We're doing it not to get it done. We're doing it to protect people, because a lot of people that are outside of dispatch don't understand that just because we're not on the scene of something doesn't mean we're not in the scene here.
Right.
And we deserve that recognition to be first responders across the United States.
And it doesn't cost the taxpayers.
It doesn't cost anything. And there's a federal bill sitting, I'm sure it's sitting there. It's never been introduced. It's been written twice.
911 CARES Act. Yep.
And it doesn't cost anything, but it opens so many more resources for us that need it. And it allows agencies to provide better help. One of the reasons I didn't get my whole retirement was because we were administrative, and an acquired illness, no matter if it was work related or not, wasn't considered an on the job thing. So I only got 60%, but Maryland eventually passed, recognizing first responders, and they started changing it. It's late, but it gives help to the people that deserve it. I learned in Warfighter that just because you're not on the front line shooting a gun doesn't mean that somebody behind the scenes doesn't do something. We had a guy that built cruise missiles on Navy destroyers. He never saw combat, but he knew when those cruise missiles were fired what they were going to do and who they were going to kill. And he was behind the scenes, and that's how I relate to dispatching too. There's still people behind the scenes that need help.
Fully agree that, and I just thank you for everything that you're doing. Um, having the courage and willingness to go out and share your story, and but also to give back in everything that you're doing. So as we go into the wrap up of this episode, first off, how can people find out more about your foundation, whether it be social media, email? Where can they follow you and find more information?
So we do have a Facebook page. You just enter in the Thingol Line Foundation. We should be the one and only that pops up.
But very important to put the in the beginning of that, because
there's other Thingol
Line pages.
But kind of the baby, the sweetheart of where you're going to find a lot of our information is the thingoldlinefoundation.com. Just like that, all lowercase, thingoldlinefoundation.com. And you'll be able to read our story. You'll be able to see what we're doing as far as fundraising events. We keep you up to date on pretty much all the training that we go through, the podcasts that we get invited to. So
there's a tab on there where employees can request resource baskets for their centers. Mm-hmm. There's a form that they can fill out, and it's not a lot, but some centers think that we're trying to sell them stuff, and it's 100% free. We don't charge even for stamps. Right. We send all that stuff to them. It's free of charge.
And Ricardo, this is kind of funny. When we first moved up here, and I started reaching out to 911 centers when we moved up here, and I got shut down a lot because it was like, "Hi, this is Kathy with the Thingol Line Foundation. Is there a director I can talk to?" And they're like, "Can I take a message?" And everybody thought I was trying to sell them something. So we've kind of backed out of the the
cold
active approach
stuff.
Right? So we've kind of gone more to a passive situation here. So on the website, thethingoldlinefoundation.com, you can request resource baskets. You can request if there's a dispatcher in need that's going through some sort of personal crisis or situation. If there's a dispatcher that's been killed while on the way to or from their job or at their job, we want to know about it. So we can reach out. So a lot of resources on our webpage. Links for you will be up there. It's not the greatest webpage on the planet, but it's mine. And so that's where you can go.
Perfect. Thank you both very much for coming on again, sharing your story. And I have one last question that both of you can answer. Because you'll have two different sides of this. So here's the question. And Jason, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself at the beginning of your public safety career, what would you tell yourself? And this is not to change anything. It's mostly just to kind of give yourself some advice. What is something that you would say to yourself?
Well, first of all, even in the shittiest of times, I would never have changed anything, because it's putting me here talking to you right now. It's putting me in a position to help people. And if we can help one person a year, then it's worth it to us. But the one thing that I would tell myself is to breathe and to take the time to process, to ask for an opportunity to absorb things, and tell myself that it's okay to ask for help.
Perfect.
I like that.
That is great. And Kathy, for you in this whole experience, really, from the beginning to now, if you could go back and tell yourself something while you're going through all of this, trying to understand everything that Jason is going through, that you as a family, your story, the both of you are going through, what would you say to yourself?
I think I would say look up Jim Marshall's book if it existed 20 years ago. No, I think I would have tried to tell myself to be more understanding of the potential of what he was going through. There were times where I was really, really angry at what he was going through because I didn't understand it. But you have to look back and say, okay, I understand it now. And I was allowed to be angry, but I wish there was just, I think, a little bit more, a little bit more education. I wish I could have looked into what his career path was, 20 years ago and understood it better. So I would have told myself to go sit in with him 20 years ago and understand it a little better. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for what you do and continue to do. And it's a powerful story. And I'm glad that we finally had a chance to talk. And I will say this, in everything that we've mentioned, these moments that the universe has brought you together, somehow you ended up speaking to my good friend Jan. And here we are.
Yes.
The universe.
And so, Ricardo, I know you're trying to wrap up here, but I got to tell you, I don't know if you know how Jan and I even met, but it's another random, and we haven't even met. We've only done some interactions through Zoom and email. The owner of her company happened to be in Oscoda and happened to attend a fundraising event that we just happened to have a booth at. And he walked by and says, "Oh, I know what the Thin Gold Line is." And he tells us about his dispatch years in Jackson and how he is now the owner of this tech company, and the universe got us in touch with Jan. So it just so happened that he was at this event in Oscoda, and Jan works for him. And yes, and that's how we know Jan now.
Wow.
Oh, the universe. I'll tell you.
That's right. The universe works in crazy ways. And here we are. And again, I thank you both for being on. And I will be right back here with you in just one moment. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us. And that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on social media. You can help support the podcast as well. The easiest way to do this, however, is to simply go to links.co/WTT podcast. And that's links with 2 I's.co/WTT podcast. And you'll find everything there. Email, social media, where to hear the latest episode, as well as where to buy Imagine Listening Volume 2 and pre-order Volume 1, my version of that book. And that is out there right now everywhere to pre-order. It will launch on February 16th. 2025. And yes, February 16th, that's a special day, anniversary of the very first 911 call ever placed in Haleyville, Alabama. So make sure to check that out when it comes out. And if you ever want to be in an episode, you can find the link on there as well. So whether you are new to dispatch, seasoned, or you are retired now, I would love to share your story. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I would love to get your story out there to literally millions from around the world. So hit me up. There's a link there. And you can also find podcast dispatch merchandise and also free continuing education. Like I mentioned earlier in this episode at the beginning, I just finished up Dare to Be Great 6. That's 6 different virtual events, but there's over, I don't know, maybe now about 300 hours worth of free continuing education. And that's all on the platform that I have all of those virtual events on, which is Crowdcast. So you can look that up, look up Within the Trenches Media. You'll find all of those events there. And this episode has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader next-gen core services. Shout out, as always, to subscribers to the podcast. You can see this on Facebook, YouTube, as well as X, LinkedIn Live, and sometimes on Instagram as well. To listen 24/7, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone. And we will see you all in the next one.
You just listened to a Code 7 Network podcast. If you have any questions or would like to be a guest on the show, send an email to wttpodcast@gmail.com.